This is an introduction to the legend of the Killing Rock. This series will be a multi-part production about the mysteries surrounding the Pound Gap Massacre, which occurred on May 14, 1892. We first began researching the Killing Rock well over 10 years ago with the intention of doing a simple storytelling video. While doing the preliminary research, we were hit with several inconsistencies and contradictions within the story itself. Wanting to be as accurate as possible in our rendition of the tale, we decided that we had to research each inconsistency and try to resolve as many of the contradictions as possible. To say the least, this has not been an easy task. Over the past 10 years, more information about Pound Gap Massacre has become available. This information comes to us in multiple forms, which includes newly digitized copies of court records, newspapers, books, government documentation, and corporate files. Most importantly, we now have information about certain events which occurred leading up to the massacre, as well as some of the people who were involved in them, both directly and indirectly. We now know more about the people who were murdered, those who survived, and who all 6 suspects were. We even have more information about the 4 men who were indicted for the crime. And lastly, we know more about the events that occurred after the Killing Rock that were a direct result of the tragedy. Although we have been researching and gathering information on the Pound Gap Massacre for over 10 years, we must state that we are not a definitive source of information. Like any historical event, there are always holes in the information. History is like a jigsaw puzzle with missing pieces. As such, we know what the overall picture is, even if we're missing a few details. When the missing pieces are small, historians look at the surrounding pieces of the puzzle to try to fill in the gap. These educated guesses are often very accurate with minor discrepancies. The process is the same when larger areas are missing. We still make our best educated guess, but often, as the pieces are found, we are surprised to discover things that were completely unexpected. That being said, we are truly living in the age of information. New evidence is coming to light each and every day, even if we are not immediately notified of it. Personal and public libraries are being digitized and made available to the public at an astounding rate. Check back often as we update our information as soon as we become aware of an update to our sources. Saturday, May 14, 1892 was a typical warm spring day on Little Elkhorn Creek. But that afternoon, a mass murder would occur that would rival anything written by Stephen King or Agatha Christie. Some think that the murders are solved and that justice was served. Others think that the accused were innocent of the crime. After the sound of gunfire had faded away and the smoke had cleared, the lives of at least a dozen families were forever changed. 5 people and 2 horses were slain. 2 people had escaped with their lives, one just barely, as one of his suspenders had been shot through. These eyewitnesses would later give conflicting stories of the event. Initially, there are 2 suspects based upon the evidence found at the scene of the massacre. Eventually, 6 suspects were named, of which 4 would be indicted, including 3 that were a total shock to the community. At the time, newspapers from across the country ran front-page headlines and articles about the event. So much so that it became the biggest mystery and whodunit in America. There was so much national interest in the story that newspapers from around the nation would continue to feature articles about the massacre, the investigation, and those who were eventually charged with the crime for the next 3 years. It was such a national controversy that it would rival the Hatfield and McCoy feud. The feud lasted several years and would eventually result in a Supreme Court trial. That trial would change the laws concerning bounty hunters. The Killing Rock, or the Pound Gap Massacre, has been tried and retried in the court of public opinion for 130 years. This is because in the trial of Doc Taylor, he pleaded innocent. The prosecution failed to establish a motive, and even in the court of public opinion, no clear motive of the crime has ever been discovered. There are dozens of conflicting stories about the massacre, the victims, and those charged with the crime. What we know for certain is that Ira Mullins was in Kentucky that week due to a court case over land. That morning they packed up to move Ira and Lorenza back to their home in Pound, Virginia. We know that they left at 10 o'clock in the morning but did not reach the site of the massacre until 1 p.m. as they had made several stops along the way, including one to meet Jane and Ira's mother so that she could take Mindy or Amarinda. We know that Mindy did not want to go with her grandmother and Jane insisted. Eventually, Mindy's father, Wilson, bribed her to stay with her grandmother using a can of peaches. The party of 7 crossing the mountain included John Chappell, Greenberry Harris, John Harris Mullins, Jane Mullins, Wilson Mullins, Ira Mullins, and his wife, Lorenza Mullins. Wilson and Jane were both on horseback, with Wilson leading the party and Jane following behind the party. Ira was laying in the back of the wagon as he was paralyzed. Lorenza and John Chappell were in the seat of the wagon. Greenberry Harris and John Harris Mullins were on foot walking behind the wagon. 30 minutes later, shots rang out on the mountain. Ira's son, John Harris Mullins, would run through the woods and down the mountainside towards Pound, Virginia. Scared and exhausted, he arrived in the town of Pound, Virginia, where he fell into the arms of Jeremiah Harris, screaming and sobbing about the massacre on the mountain. Jane Mullins and her horse would disappear until 5 p.m. that afternoon. No clear explanation was given for her disappearance, and conflicting stories have been told as to where she was. No one who came upon the scene of the event from either side of the mountain had reported seeing Jane on their travels. This will be a multi-part series broken down into 2 topics titled The Killing Rock, the Oft Told Tale, and The Killing Rock, the Untold Story. We will begin our series with the Oft Told Tale, which is a basic telling of the story as it is often told. However, in our telling, we will remove the inconsistencies and contradictions that have plagued the story for 130 years. It is our belief that the inconsistencies and contradictions arose due primarily to 2 facts. The first being that the prosecution never established a motive in the trial of Dr. Marshall Benton Taylor. This led to speculation of a motive among the people of the region. Dr. Taylor was well known and respected in the community. Not only was he considered to be a compassionate man and doctor, but he was also a preacher and a former U.S. Deputy Marshal. The second is that there may have been a concerted effort to appease the speculators. Several facts about the incident seem to have been hidden using confusion and/or deception. For instance, the story tells us that Jane Mullins had died before she could testify against Heenan Fleming. In this telling, it is often said that Jane died in childbirth. However, this is not how Jane died, and that is not why the charges were eventually dropped against Heenan. In the Untold Story, we will examine the list of inconsistencies and contradictions of the story. We will dive into the events prior to the massacre, which will include the only possible motive that would have directly tied Dr. Taylor and the Fleming brothers to the crime, and why the motive was never hinted at during the trial. We will examine the transcript of the trial and why Dr. Taylor was convicted on circumstantial evidence instead of the testimony given by the eyewitness. Lastly, we will look at the aftereffects of the massacre and the trial. It is our deepest hope that if you're familiar with the Killing Rock, or if you are someone who has stumbled upon this series about the Pound Gap Massacre, that you will watch and listen to all the evidence that we will present in this series with an open mind, and that you would join us and thousands of others who for the past 130 years have all asked the same question: was the right man hung for the crime? Thank you for watching our video. We thank you for continuing to support Kentucky Tennessee Living as we bring you the history of the Appalachian Mountains. Please like, subscribe, and share below. Also hit the bell for notifications of future videos. And once again, be sure to leave us a "Hey y'all" in the comment section below. Thank you for continuing to support us and watch our videos.